Good afternoon, everybody. I'm really honored to be here with you, Chairperson, and all of you. Um, Equality Now is an international human rights organization whose mission is really to achieve legal and systemic change to address all forms of violence and discrimination against women and girls around the world. And legal equality is one of our main focus areas. And of course, it's also an issue that's close to my own heart, having been born here in Switzerland and would not have had a nationality, save for my father, my English father, being able to register me, not my mother. Also, again, there could have been an issue, and then emigrating to the United States, where now I've become a naturalized citizen. But there we also have issues in terms of men passing to children abroad. So yes, just wanted to share that briefly. Not many people know that it's truly a global issue. Yes, and so Equality Now is one of the founding steering committee members of the Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights, which was launched 10 years ago at the Human Rights Council. And just a year later, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted by consensus by all UN member states. And as Catherine mentioned earlier this morning, 9 of the 17 SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, really are related to nationality rights, and they have a big impact on whether those goals can be achieved. So in addition to the 2 objectives, actually, maybe I'll just pause there for a second. Okay. I'll go to the next slide. In addition to the 2 objectives that the chair already shared, I'll also at the very end just briefly map some of the upcoming opportunities where governments can actually showcase their reforms or commitments to reforms, just to keep that in mind, what's happening in the global space, where these can be shared and people can learn from good practice examples. So hopefully Malaysia will be presenting perhaps at the high level political forum next summer as having reformed. You never know. So yeah, so the next 2 slides, I'll just share some of those specific goals that Catherine mentioned. And I should also say that there's a flyer out on the front table that has both our report and then also the Global Campaign specific brief on the SDGs, which this presentation is mainly based on. So you can get that online, and I think there's some copies of that there as well. So yeah, so obviously the first main goal that's most relevant, I would say, for equal nationality rights is SDG 5, the one on gender equality and empowerment of women. And interestingly, the target for that is ending all forms of discrimination. But then there's an indicator, how do you measure that, that civil society really inputted into, as well as member states. And that is specifically on whether or not legal frameworks are in place to promote, enforce, and monitor equality and non-discrimination on the basis of sex. So every year, UN Women does a report of how governments are meeting that goal and looking at this indicator. And in their latest report, they found that where policies empower women economically, there is greater female labor participation, less vulnerable employment, and greater representation of women in national parliaments, which we know often leads to better laws, as the World Bank has shown a lot over the years. So that's the main indicator that we look at. And every year at the High Level Political Forum, certain goals are looked at very closely, and SDG 5 is coming up in 2025. So that's going to be an important year for all of us, I think. The next goal is pretty similar, actually, SDG 10 on reducing inequalities, which I think says a lot about the relationship between legal equality and equality of opportunity economically. And if there isn't nationality, as we've heard earlier, the impact is that often you can't get the same jobs. You might not have the educational opportunities. So you're harming not just the women who can't pass the nationality to the children, but to the children themselves, as well as the spouses that don't have those rights. And then the third, I'd say, main SDG that we use in our advocacy is 16.9, which the indicator or target rather is that by 2030, legal identity, including birth registration, is provided to everybody. And I think we heard very loudly from the Committee on the Rights of the Child member that how important birth registration is for nationality and many other rights, including ending child marriage, I would say. And then this is just showing all the other sort of related SDGs. Obviously, SDG 1, no poverty. The whole point of the Sustainable Development Goals is to leave nobody behind. And, you know, without nationality, as we heard again and again, it's harder to get good employment. Families are dependent on women's income, more economically vulnerable, especially if they can't pass to their spouses who can't work or have the same opportunities. SDG 2 on ending hunger, achieving food security and improving nutrition, same issues there. SDG 3, ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all ages. So without nationality, we heard the example of not being able to access the same state healthcare systems if you're lucky to have that in your country. SDG 4, ensuring inclusive and equitable education for all. Often children without nationality have to pay higher school fees if they can even be registered in the system itself. And we've seen even cases where they're denied access to vaccines that might be given at schools because of their status as a non-citizen. SDG 8, which is also coming up at the high-level political forum, which has a target of promoting economic growth, full employment, and decent work for all. So without nationality, again, you might be more vulnerable to economic exploitation, trafficking, both for labor and for sex. And then finally, SDG 11 on making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Without nationality and formal employment, this is much harder to acquire or afford housing. So those are sort of that's the broad overview, but definitely the global campaign brochure has more of the details, but wanted to share those as those are good entry points, I would say, for advocacy and also for making those arguments in your parliaments as to why it's so necessary to have equality in your law. So this is just some of the upcoming opportunities. As I mentioned, the high-level political forum is every July in New York, and SDGs 3, 5, and 8 are all being reviewed. The countries actually have just been announced that are going to be sort of giving their voluntary national reports or how they're doing to meet these goals, and including the ones in the room are Eswatini, Iraq, Malaysia, and Qatar. And there's usually about 40 altogether. So yes, I'm hoping Malaysia will be able to really be showcased there. And then I also wanted to mention that there's the Pact for the Future, which was adopted this past September at the General Assembly and is meant to be sort of reinforcement of the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development Goals. And it very clearly has in Action 8 to remove all legal, social, and economic barriers to gender equality. We're not sure how it will be enforced or what the implementation of it will look like. But again, another argument for supporting equality and nationality laws. And finally, just to mention, you've maybe already participated in this process because it's well underway now, but the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action will be, I guess, both celebrated and also questioned as to how it's been really realized at the Commission on the Status of Women in March. So many countries have already reported on how they're doing to meet those goals, and there's very clear language in the Beijing Platform for Action also about removing any discrimination in the law. Yeah, so that's just a brief overview. I'm happy to share the materials afterwards if anybody would like to see more. And then we had a couple of discussion questions, but we're excited to hear from you on how your national development plans might reflect the issue of nationality and citizenship. You know, what elements could really benefit from having equality in your nationality laws. and how you might make those links. So I'll turn it over to the chair